I did, even though I had to cancel, Warhamster had an issue, so he actually canceled. I didn't. Our noon show. I did do a Zoom podcast with the guy that's over in Russia. Um, and wow, was it so interesting. Little did I know, the guy actually, his parents brought him to the United States as a youngster. He spent like 10 years in the US Army and worked for Halliburton and in the oil part of that. And he's actually living in Russia right now. I think he was in the army up to he enlisted and then he got his commission similar to me, but he left in I think he said that he had been promoted to major, but he declined the promotion and separated because it was going to incur 3 years commitment, and that was at the height of George Bush and him wanting to, fight every war. Um, so he got out, got a couple of master's degrees in different things. One of the most interesting conversations I've had, he had a firm grasp of what Operation Gladio was, not in the detail that we know. And he also understood what Operation Condor was. So it was just extremely an interesting conversation. So as soon as he sends me a link, I'll post it. And we definitely agreed to have more conversations. What a smart guy. So anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So now, once we get that out on the internet, people start calling me a Russian bot again. Little do they know the guy's actually a US Army officer. I love it. All right. Nothing like shaking up some crap every day. All right. We are going to continue with For the Good of the Country, this chapter that we started briefly yesterday. And it is chapter 20. All right. But we're on part 25 because some of these chapters are really long. Okay. JFK always displayed a sharp curiosity about the much wealthier family pumping mutual friends like presidential advisor Adolph Burrell for inside information about the Rockefellers. Jack and David had been contemporaries at Harvard, but as David was quick to point out, we moved in very different circles. As Kennedy pursued his own career, he always kept one eye on the politically ambitious Nelson Rockefeller, who had, oh, what happened to Bridget? Who had openly proclaimed his desire to occupy the White House. It was an ambition he nursed, as he was quoted, ever since I was a kid. Ever since I was a kid. After all, when you think of what I had, what else is there to aspire to? Nelson was quoted as saying. Nelson let slip his facade only when contemplating looming threats to his family's wealth. He had long fretted about losing our property to nationalist movements overseas. I don't know what's going on with Bridget, but Illini, I'm going to put you up as co-host in case something happens to our space. When Castro gave a bearded face to these fears, expropriating the Standard Oil refinery and other Rockefeller properties in Cuba, Nelson was outraged. He grew increasingly frustrated with Kennedy as he sidestepped opportunities to invade Cuba, becoming convinced that the president had cut a deal with the Russians. It was Nelson's growing sense of Kennedy as a Cold War appeaser that drove him to begin mounting a presidential challenge in 1964. In his final political speeches before the Kennedy assassination, Rockefeller lashed into the president for his indecision vacillation, and weakness in the foreign policy arena. The Kennedy administration dynamic image was a public relations myth. Rockefeller insisted. In truth, he charged JFK's unassertive leadership had encouraged our enemies and demoralized our allies and had made the world much more dangerous for people like him, not for the rest of us. These views of Kennedy were widely echoed in the pages of the business press, where JFK was portrayed as a soft spined commander in chief who was putting the country at risk, and in the estimation of the Wall Street Journal, an incompetent economic manager with a pronounced hostility to the philosophy of freedom. What the hell? Like the loose press, the Journal became increasingly vitriolic in its description of the president, describing him as an enemy of big business and as a hopeless left-wing romantic, living in a dream world and laboring under the spell of damaging delusion. In short, Kennedy was seen as an aberrant president in elite circles, an unqualified man who, it was broadly hinted, had barely squeezed into office thanks to the underhanded dealings of his mafia-connected father. The attitudes toward Kennedy were even more rabid in national security chambers, where men like Angleton and LeMay regarded the president as a degenerate and very likely a traitor. If the Soviets launched a sneak nuclear attack on America, Engel brooded, the Kennedys would be safely cocooned in their luxury bunker, presumably watching World War III on television while the rest of us burned in hell. Angleton seemed obsessed with Kennedy's sex life. He reportedly bugged JFK's White House, and that's where the Mary Meyer, Cord Meyer's wife, ex-wife, rumored affair came from the CIA. He told friends and family that Kennedy's rule was marked by sexual decadence as well as criminality, a particularly ironic twist since Angleton himself was later revealed to have been connected to the mafia ever since his time in Rome. That's why I don't even know what part of that whole propaganda campaign is true and what's not true, because it originated with the CIA. Over the final months of JFK's presidency, a clear consensus took shape within America's deep state. Kennedy was a national security threat. For the good of the country, he must be removed. And Dulles was the only man with a stature, connection, and decisive will to make something like that happen. He had already assembled a killing machine to operate overseas. Gladio. Now he prepared to bring it home to Dallas. All that his establishment colleagues had to do was look the other way, as they always did when Dulles took his executive action. In the case of Doug Dillon, who oversaw Kennedy's Secret Service apparatus, it simply meant making sure that he was out of town. At the end of October, Dillon notified the president that he planned to take a deferred summer vacation in November, abandoning his Washington post for Hobe Sound until the 18th of the month. After that, Dillon informed Kennedy he planned to fly to Tokyo with other cabinet members on an official visit that would keep him out of the country until the 27th. If he was later asked to account for himself, Dillon would have a ready explanation. The tragic events in Dallas had not occurred on his watch. He was airborne. There is no evidence that corporate figures like David Rockefeller were part of the plot against Kennedy or had foreknowledge of the crime. But there is ample opportunity of the overwhelming hostility to Kennedy in the corporate circles, a surging antagonism that certainly emboldened Dulles and other national security enemies of the president. And if the assassination of JFK was indeed an establishment crime, as University of Pittsburgh Professor Donald Gibson suggested there is even more reason to see the official investigation as a cover up. Oswald was still alive, and that was a problem. He was supposed to have been killed as he left the Texas Book Depository. That's what G. Robert Blakey, the former Kennedy Justice Department attorney who served as the chief counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassination, later concluded about the man authorities rushed to designate as the lone assassin. But Oswald escaped, and after being taken alive by Dallas police in a movie theater, it became a major cauldron for trying to pin the crime on him. To begin with, Oswald did not act like an assassin. Those who decapitated heads of state generally crowed about their history-making deed. In contrast, Oswald repeatedly denied his guilt while in custody, emphatically telling reporters as he was hustled from one room to the next at the Dallas police station, "I don't know what this is all about. I'm just a patsy." And the accused assassin seemed strangely cool and collected, according to police detectives who questioned him. "He was real calm," one detective said. "He was extra calm. He wasn't a bit excited or nervous or anything." In fact, Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry and District Attorney William Alexander thought Oswald was so composed that he seemed to have been trained to handle interrogations. "I was amazed that a person so young would have been so self-controlled," Alexander later told an investigative journalist. "It was almost as if he had been rehearsed or programmed to meet the situation he found himself in." Oswald further signaled that he was part of an intelligence operation by trying to make an intriguing telephone call shortly before midnight East Coast time on Saturday, November 23rd. The police switchboard operator, who was being closely monitored by two unidentified officials, told Oswald there was no answer, though she actually didn't even put the call through. It was not until years later that independent researchers traced the phone number that he tried to call to a U.S. Army intelligence officer in Raleigh, North Carolina. CIA veteran Victor Marchetti, who analyzed the Raleigh call in his book, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, surmised that Oswald was likely following his training guide and reaching out to his handler. He was probably calling his cutout. He was calling someone who could put him in touch with his case officer. The Raleigh call probably sealed Oswald's fate, according to Marchetti. By refusing to play the role of patsy and instead following his intelligence protocol, Oswald made it clear he was in trouble. What would the CIA procedure at this point be? Marchetti was asked by a historian, Grover Proctor, who was closely studying this episode. Marchetti quickly replied, "I'd kill him." "Was this his death warrant?" Proctor asked. "You betcha." This time, Oswald went over the dam. Whether he knew it or not, he was over the dam. At this point, it was executive action. Oswald was not just alive on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963. He was likely innocent. This was another major problem for the organizers of the assassination. Even close legal observers of the case who continue to believe in Oswald's guilt, such as Bob Blakely, who, after serving on the House Assassination Committee, became a law professor at Notre Dame, acknowledged that a credible case could be made for Oswald's innocence based on the evidence. A 1979 congressional report found that Kennedy was the victim of a conspiracy involving Oswald and unknown parties. Well, we kind of knew some of the parties, but we're not allowed to say it because they're attached to the Mafia and CIA. Other legal experts, like San Francisco attorney and Kennedy researcher Bill Simpic, have gone further, arguing that the case against Oswald was riddled with inconsistencies that it would have quickly been unraveled in a court of law. Simpic has detailed the ballistic evidence alone was a mess. The bullets and the shells from the crime scene did not match the murder weapon. and were poorly marked by law enforcement officers. The so-called magic bullet that delivered the fatal blow to Kennedy's skull before proceeding on its improbable course later turned up just like magic in pristine condition on a stretcher. Then there was the alleged murder weapon, a 1995 Italian military surplus rifle from World War II with a faulty sight. Using such a clumsy tool to pull off the crime of the century with rapid fire precision, especially in the hands of a marksman who had a hard time shooting rabbits, simply defy the imagination. There was also the fact that the FBI technicians who tested the rifle could find none of Oswald's fingerprints on the weapon, and the Dallas police failed to detect any trace of gunpowder on Oswald. And what's interesting about that, based on what we've just read and what we know about Operation Gladio, is it's an Italian military weapon. Think about that for just a second. With Harvey at the Rome station going to Sardinia and traveling to Dallas not that long before all of this happened. In addition, Buell Wesley Frazier, a young Texas school book depository employee who drove Oswald to work that morning, insisted the package the alleged assassin carried into the building that day did not contain a rifle. The 19-year-old Frazier refused to change his story despite being arrested and subjected to interrogation by the Dallas police, including threats to charge him as a co-conspirator. I was interrogated for many, many hours, he later said, and the interrogators would rotate. The way they treated me that day, I have a hard time understanding. I was just a rule boy. I had never been in trouble with the law. I was doing my best to answer the questions. He could never figure out in his own mind whether Oswald was guilty or not. But there was one thing he knew for certain. He told the newspaper reporters 50 years later, the brown paper package that Oswald put on the back seat of his car was not big enough to contain a rifle. And when there was and then there's the inconvenient home movie taken by dress manufacturer Abram Zapruder as Kennedy's limousine passed by him in Daly Square. The film captured the moments JFK was struck by gunfire in gruesome detail, and along with the testimony of dozens of eyewitnesses, graphically demonstrated that bullets were fired from the front as well as the rear. As many as 21 law enforcement officers stationed in the plaza, men trained in the use of firearms, said their immediate reaction to the sound of gunfire was to go search the area looming in front of Kennedy's limousine, the treetop rise that would become the grassy knoll. Even if Oswald did shoot at the president, this meant that there was at least other gunmen, and Kennedy was the victim of a conspiracy. The CIA's own state-of-the-art photography analysis unit came to this conclusion after analyzing the Zapruder film. FBI analysts would later concur, but the CIA technician's report was quickly suppressed. The surgeons who labored futilely over the mortally wounded president at Parkland Hospital also saw clear evidence that Kennedy had been struck by a gunfire from the front. But the doctors came under severe pressure to maintain silence, and it would take nearly 3 decades before 2 of them mustered the courage to speak. Fortunately for the conspirators, the deeply flawed case against Oswald never made it to court. The Oswald problem was abruptly eliminated the morning of Sunday, November 24th, while Dulles is at the command center on the farm. When the accused assassin was shot in the stomach in the basement of the Dallas police station while in the process of being transferred to the county jail. He died 2 hours later in the same emergency room that President Kennedy was pronounced dead. Oswald's shocking murder, broadcast live on American TV, solved one dilemma for Dulles. As he monitored the Dallas events, it would soon become apparent that Oswald's murder created another problem, a public wave of suspicion that swept over the nation. Jack Ruby, Oswald's killer, a stocky nightclub operator, looked like a triggerman right out of a B movie. Ruby even sounded like a Hollywood gangster as he gunned down Oswald, shouting, "You killed my president, you rat." To many people who watched the spectacle on TV, the shooting smacked of a gangland hit aimed at silencing Oswald. In fact, that is precisely what Attorney General Robert Kennedy concluded after his investigators began digging into Ruby's background. Bobby, who had made his political reputation as a Senate investigator of organized crime, pored over Ruby's phone records from the days leading up to the Dallas violence. The list was almost a duplicate of the people I called before the Rackets Committee, RFK said. The Attorney General's suspicion about the death of his brother immediately fell not just on the mafia, but on the CIA, the agency that, as Bobby knew, had been using the mob to do its dirty work. Robert Kennedy was not the only one in Washington who immediately sensed a conspiracy. The nation's capital was filled with edgy chatter about the assassination. Talking on the phone with Kennedy family confidant Bill Walton, Agnes Meyer, the outspoken mother of Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham, snapped, quote, "What is this, some kind of GD banana republic?" Unquote. Eisenhower, retired on his Gettysburg farm, had the same reaction. He remarked that the bloodshed in Dallas reminded him of his tour of duty in Haiti as a young Army major. When he visited the National Palace in Port-au-Prince, he was shocked to realize that 2/3 of the former heads of state whose marble busts were on displays had been killed in office. Interesting. Meanwhile, down in Independence, Missouri, another retired president, Harry Truman, was fuming about the CIA. On December 22nd, 1963, while the country was still reeling from the gunfire in Dallas, Truman published a highly provocative op-ed article in the Washington Post, charging that the CIA had grown alarmingly out of control since he established it. His original purpose, wrote Truman, was to create an agency to simply coordinate streams of sensitive information for the White House. I have never had any thought that when I set up that it would have been injected into peacetime cloak and dagger operations. For some time, I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has diverted from its original assignment. It has become an operational and at times policy-making arm of the government. He actually used it for that, so this is kind of frame shock. The CIA had grown so removed from its intended role that it is being interpreted as a symbol of sinister and mysterious foreign intrigue. But the increasingly powerful agency did not just menace foreign governments, Truman warned. It's now threatening democracy at home. Quote, "There is something about the way the CIA has been functioning that is casting a shadow over our historic position as a free and open society, and I feel that we need to correct it," unquote. The timing of Truman's opinion piece was striking. Appearing in the capital's leading newspaper exactly 1 month after the assassination, the article caused shockwaves. There was a disturbing undertone to the straight-talking Midwestern warning about the CIA. Was Truman implying that there was a sinister and mysterious intrigue behind Kennedy's death? Overseas, the speculation about Kennedy's murder and the suspicious shooting of his alleged assassin was even more rampant. The foreign press was filled with commentary suggesting that there were powerful forces involved in the assassination, naming Cold War militarist, big business, and Texas oilmen as possible culprits. Some of the coverage, unsurprisingly, came from the Soviet bloc newspapers eager to dispel the rumors that Oswald was part of a communist plot, rumors that were often traceable to the CIA. but much of the conjecture about Dallas came from publications in Western European alliance. The Hamburg, in Hamburg, the Daily Die Welt editorialized that the official handling of Kennedy and Oswald cases left a forest of question marks. In London, the Daily Mail spoke of whispers that Oswald was a fall guy who was rubbed out, and the Daily Telegraph derided Police Chief Curry's announcement that Oswald's death put a close to the Kennedy case was, quote, monumentally absurd, unquote. And in Italy, where the limitations of the rifle were well known within a generation of World War II veterans, the newspaper Carri Lombardo observed that there's no way Oswald could have used a bolt action weapon to squeeze off 3 shots in 6 seconds, as official reports from Dallas was claiming. Suspicions of a conspiracy were particularly strong in France, where President de Gaulle himself had been a target of the CIA assassins, surviving a barrage of gunfire on his limousine. After returning from Kennedy's funeral in Washington, de Gaulle gave a remarkably candid assessment of the assassination to his information minister. Quote, "What happened to Kennedy is what nearly happened to me. His story is the same as mine. It looks like a cowboy story, but it's only an OAS story. The security forces were in cahoots with the extremist," unquote. Now, you guys know that I've been talking about the OAS being involved in Kennedy's assassination now for years. As soon as I read that there were OAS agents in Dallas that day and that one was escorted to the Mexican border, I was like, holy crap, because OAS is their Gladio. Here's Charles de Gaulle, who knows the OAS better than anybody, saying it was the OAS, which means it was NATO, which means Lyman Lemetsker was involved in it because he was at NATO. He was the NATO commander. As a matter of survival, de Gaulle and his loyal deputies had been compelled to investigate the underworld, where intelligence forces, political zealots, and gangsters all converged. He's talking about Gladio. More than any other Western leader, he was well aware of how security services, in the name of combating quote unquote communism, joined hands with some of the most extreme and vicious allies to win their goals. De Gaulle was convinced that Kennedy had fallen victim to the same forces who repeatedly over 30 times tried to kill him. "Do you think Oswald was a front?" de Gaulle was asked. "Everything leads me to believe it. They got their hands on this communist who wasn't one while still being one. He had a subpar intellect and was exalted fanatic. Just the man they needed, the perfect one to be accused. The guy ran away because he probably became suspicious. They wanted to kill him on the spot before he could be grabbed by the judicial system. Unfortunately, it didn't happen exactly the way they probably planned it. But a trial, you realize, is just terrible. People would have talked. They would have dug up too much. They would have unearthed everything. Then the security forces went looking for a cleanup man they totally controlled and who couldn't refuse their offer. And that guy sacrificed himself to kill the fake assassin, supposedly in defense of Kennedy's memory," unquote. Okay. Security forces all over the world, this is another quote, "Security forces all over the world are the same when they do this kind of dirty work. As soon as they succeed in wiping out the fake assassin, they declare that the justice system no longer needs to be concerned, that no further public action is needed now that the guilty perpetrator was dead. Better to assassinate an innocent man than to let a civil war break out. Better an injustice than disorder." That's crazy. America is in danger of upheavals, but you'll see all of them together will observe the law of silence. They will close ranks. They'll do everything to stifle any scandal. They will throw Noah's cloak over these shameful deeds in order to not lose face in front of the whole world, in order to not risk unleashing riots in the US, in order to preserve the Union and to avoid a new civil war, in order to not ask themselves questions. They don't want to know. They don't want to find out. They won't allow themselves to find out. Unquote. These astonishing observations about Dallas were captured in a memoir about Charles de Gaulle, which was published in France in 2002, 3 years after the author's death. Snippets of the conversation appeared in the US press, but the book was not translated and published in America, and de Gaulle's remarks about Kennedy's assassination was never reported outside of France. A half century later, this extraordinary commentary by a French leader, a political colossal of the 20th century, remains one of the most disturbing and insightful perspectives on this tragic American event. They don't want to find out. They won't allow themselves to find out. Allen Dulles knew the danger of words, the wrong kind of words. As CIA director, he had spent an untold fortune each year countering propaganda machines and creating them, including the political and media dialogue in his own country. Within minutes of Kennedy's assassination, the CIA tried to steer news reporting and commentary about Dallas, planting stories falsely that Oswald was a Soviet agent or that Castro was behind the murder. In actuality, both Khrushchev, who had broken down crying in the Kremlin when he heard the news, and Castro was deeply distressed at the death. Both men had been greatly encouraged by Kennedy's peace initiatives in the final year of his presidency. They feared now that his assassination meant the military hardliners had won. This was bad news for everybody, Castro muttered. Because at the time of the murder, there was a French journalist sitting with Castro when he got the news. He was a peace emissary from Kennedy. So Castro's exact words at the moment he found out Kennedy was assassinated: "This is bad news. Everything has changed." Castro immediately predicted that the agency would pin the murder on him. And sure enough, the Cuban leader and the French journalist listened to U.S. radio and broadcasters suddenly connecting Oswald to Fair Play for Cuba Committee. But despite the CIA's strenuous efforts, press coverage of the Kennedy assassination spun out of control. Dulles knew that immediate steps had to be taken to contain the conversation. One of his first concerns was the Washington echo chamber. He quickly realized the danger posed by Truman's explosive piece in the Washington Post, which instantly caught fire and inspired several anti-CIA editorials from Charlotte, North Carolina to Sacramento, California. Syndicated columnist Richard Starnes used the Truman op-ed to launch a broadside against the CIA, calling it a cloudy organism of uncertain purpose and appalling power. Meanwhile, Senator Eugene McCarthy, another agency critic, weighed in on an essay in the Saturday Evening Post, a popular middle American magazine that featured the art of Norman Rockwell, bluntly titled, "The CIA is Getting Out of Hand." There was no telling how far the media whirlwind would go and what it would stir up. The frenzy of criticism that was suddenly directed at the CIA cloak and dagger operation seemed to be connected, if only subliminally, to a billowing anxiety that the public felt about unsolved mystery in Dallas. Excuse me. If Harry Truman, the man who created the CIA, was worried about it, it might be a matter of time before prominent European figures and even more stray voices in America began to question it and its role in the murder. It was Dulles himself who jumped in to put out the Truman fire. Soon after the Post published Truman's diatribe, Dulles began a campaign to get the retired president to disavow his own piece. The spy master began enlisting the help of Washington power attorney, again Clark Clifford, the same Clark Clifford that was involved in the BCCI scandal. That Clark Clifford. The former Truman counselor who chaired President Johnson's Intelligence Advisory Board, the CIA, quote, was really HST's baby, Truman's, or at least his adopted child, Dulles pointed out in a letter to Clifford. Perhaps the attorney could talk some sense into the old bird and get him to retract his harsh criticism of the agency. Dulles also appealed directly to Truman in a strongly worded letter, telling the former president he was deeply disturbed by his article. In an 8-page letter that he mailed January 7th, 1964, Dulles tried to implicate Truman himself, calling Truman the father of the modern intelligence system. Dulles reminded him that it was you, through the National Security Council action, who approved the organization in CIA of a new office to carry out covert operations. And that is true. So, Dulles continued, Truman's ill-advised rant in the Post amounted to a repudiation of a policy that the former president himself, quote, had the great courage and wisdom to initiate, unquote. To an extent, Dulles had a point. As the spy master pointed out, the Truman Doctrine was indeed authorized an aggressive strategy aimed at thwarting communist advances in Western Europe, including CIA's intervention in the 1948 Italian elections. But Truman was correct in charging that under Eisenhower, Dulles had led the CIA into much deeper operations. Unmoved by Dulles's letter, Truman stood by his article. Realizing the threat that Truman posed, Dulles continued his crusade to discredit it. Confident of his powers of persuasion, the spy master made a personal trip to Independence, Missouri, in a face-to-face meeting with Truman. After exchanging a few minutes of small talk, Dulles mounted his assault on Truman, employing his usual sweet talk and arm twisting. But Truman, even on the brink of turning 80, was not a pushover, and Dulles' efforts were fruitless. Still, Dulles would not accept defeat. Unable to alter reality, he simply altered the record, like any good spy would do. On April 21st, 1964, upon returning to Washington, Dulles wrote a letter about his half-hour meeting with Truman to CIA General Counsel Lawrence Houston. During their conversation at Truman Library, Dulles claimed in his letter the elderly ex-president seemed quite astounded by his own attack on the CIA when the spy master showed him the copy of the Post article. As he looked it over, Truman reacted as if he was reading it for the first time. According to Dulles, he said the article was all wrong. He then said that he felt like it was left in an unfortunate impression. So Dulles is writing a letter to the chief legal guy at the CIA, lying his ass off. The Truman portrayed in Dulles's letter seemed to be suffering from senility and either could not remember that he had written it or had taken advantage of by an aide, who perhaps wrote this piece under the former president's name. In fact, CIA officials later did try to blame Truman's assistant for writing the opinion piece. Truman obviously was highly disturbed at the Washington Post article, concluded Dulles's letter, and several times he said he'd see what he could do about it. The Dulles letter to Houston was clearly intended for CIA files to be retrieved whenever they needed it. It was an outrageous piece of disinformation. Truman, who would live another 8 years, was still of sound mind in April 1964, and he could not have been more shocked by the contents of his own article, since he had been expressing the same views about the CIA, even more strongly to friends and journalists, for quite some time. After the Bay of Pigs, Truman had confided in a writer, Merle Miller, that he regretted ever establishing the CIA. I think it was a mistake, he said, and if I'd known what was going to happen, I never would have done it. Eisenhower never paid any attention to it, and it got out of hand. It became a government all of its own and all secret. That's a very dangerous thing in a democratic society, he said. Likewise, after the Washington Post essay ran, Truman's original CIA director, Admiral Sidney Sowers, who shared his former boss's limited concept of the agency, congratulated him on writing the piece. Quote, I am happy as I can be that my article on the CIA rang a bell with you because you know why the organization was set up, unquote, Truman wrote back to him. In a letter that Truman wrote to Look magazine managing editor William Arthur in June of 64, 2 months after his meeting with Dulles, the former president again articulated his concerns about the direction of the CIA after he left the White House. Quote, the CIA was set up by me for the sole purpose of getting available information to the president. It was not intended to operate as an international agency engaged in strange activities, unquote. Unfortunately, Truman had used it for strange activities. Dulles's relentless effort to manipulate Truman, and failing that, the Truman Record, is yet another example of the spy master's strange activities. But Dulles's greatest success at reconstructing reality was still to come. With the Warren Report, Dulles could literally rewrite history. The inquest into the death of JFK was another astounding sleight of hands on Dulles' part. The man who should have been in the witness chair was in control. How did Allen Dulles, a man fired by JFK with bitter circumstances, come to oversee the investigation into his murder? This crucial historical question has been the subject of speculation for many years. The story apparently began when LBJ, a man not known for his devotion to the truth, has been repeatedly over time by various historians, including Johnson biographer Robert Caro, who one would think would be more skeptical considering the exhaustive detail with which he documented JFK's habitual deceit in his multi-volume work. In his 1971 memoir, Johnson wrote that he appointed Dulles and John McCloy to the Warren Commission because they were two men Bobby Kennedy asked me to put on it. With Bobby Kennedy safely dead by 1971, LBJ clearly felt that he could get away with that lie. But the idea that LBJ would huddle with a man he hated in order to discuss a political sensitive composition of that commission is ludicrous. The Warren Commission inquiry had the ability to shake the new Johnson presidency and the U.S. government itself to their very core. In making his choices for the commission, Johnson wrote later, he sought, quote, men who were known to be beyond pressure and above suspicion, unquote. But the biggest suspected criminal of all was put in charge of it. What LBJ wanted was men who could be trusted to close the case and put the public suspicion to rest. The Warren Commission was not established to find the truth, but to lay the dust that had been stirred up in Dallas. As McCloy stated, quote, dust not only in the United States, but all over the world, unquote. Equally preposterous is the notion that Bobby Kennedy would nominate Dulles and McCloy, two men who had fallen out with President Kennedy while serving on the National Security Team, to investigate his brother's murder. Like Dulles, whose former agency Bobby immediately suspected of having a role in the assassination, McCloy was a Cold War hardliner too. McCloy had resigned as JFK's chief arms negotiator at the end of 1962 in frustration with what he felt to be Soviet intransigence. But it was McCloy himself who was the obstacle. Several months after Kennedy replaced him with Averell Harriman, a man the Russians trusted, the two superpowers reached a historic agreement to limit nuclear arms testing. McCloy was over there to ensure it didn't happen. McCloy, who had served as chairman of Chase Manhattan before David Rockefeller moved into the bank leadership role, was closely aligned to Rockefeller interests. After leaving the Kennedy administration, he joined the Wall Street law firm, where he represented Clint Murchison and Sid Richardson, with whom he had done business since his days at Chase Manhattan. It was a national security establishment, not Bobby Kennedy, that advised the new president put Dulles and McCloy on the Warren Commission. And Johnson, finally tuned to the desires of the men who had put him in the Oval Office, obliged. The Dulles camp itself made no bones about the fact that the old man aggressively lobbied to get appointed to the commission. Dick Helms later told historian Michael Kurtz that he, quote, personally persuaded, unquote, Johnson to appoint Dulles. According to Kurtz, Dulles and Helms wanted to make sure no agency secrets came out during the investigation. What agency secrets would come out as a result of an investigation into the assassination of the US president, one might ask? Of course, if Dulles was on the commission, that would ensure the agency would be safe. Johnson felt the same way. He didn't want the investigation to dig anything up strange. William Corson, a former Marine Corps officer and Navy intelligence who was close to Dulles, confirmed that the spy master pulled strings to get on the Warren Commission. Quote, he lobbied hard for the job, unquote, Corson said. He had commanded young Allen Jr. during the Korean War. After he took his place on the commission, Dulles recruited Corson to explore the Jack Ruby angle. After spending months pursuing various leads, Corson eventually concluded that he had been sent on a wild goose chase. Quote, it is entirely possible I was sent on an assignment which would go nowhere. Allen Dulles had a lot to hide, unquote. Among those urging Johnson to give Dulles the Warren Commission job were establishment allies like Secretary of State Dean Rusk, former president of the Rockefeller Foundation. These same voices were raised on behalf of McCloy. In fact, the commission was, from the very beginning, an establishment creation. It was sold to an initially reluctant LBJ, I doubt that, by the most influential voices in Washington power, including Joe Alsop, the CIA's ever-dependent mouthpiece, and the Washington Post and New York Times. Johnson wanted the investigation handled by officials in Texas, where he felt more in control. But in a phone call to the White House on the morning of November 25th, Alsop maneuvered Johnson into accepting the idea of a presidential commission made up nationally known figures beyond any possible suspicion. Yeah, who would suspect the guy that was fired by JFK to be complicit in killing him? It's just beyond belief. When Johnson clung to his idea of a Texas investigation, Alsop set him straight, as if lecturing a country bumpkin. My lawyers, though, Joe, tell me that the White House, the president, must not inject himself into local killings, LBJ said, as if he was pleading with a supposed reporter. I agree with that, Alsop said, but in this case, it does happen to be the killing of a president. Dulles immediately accepted Johnson's request to join the commission when the president phoned him on November 29th. I would like to be of any help, Dulles told him. He went on to say that he felt compelled to at least raise the propriety of appointing a former CIA director that had had a troubled relationship. And you've considered the work of my previous work and my previous job, Dulles said. I sure have, LBJ said, and we want you to do it. That's that. You always do what's best for the country. I found out about you a long time ago, unquote. You're a lying devil. In the end, it all worked out just as Washington establishment wanted, and as Charles de Gaulle had predicted. The commission was to investigate Kennedy's murder, was made up of all of the senators and congressmen who were close to the CIA, the FBI, and Johnson. And it was dominated by the two craftiest men in the hearing room, Dulles and McCloy. After months of investigative wheel spinning, the panel would reach its foregone conclusion. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing the president, case closed. When President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, one of the new African leaders who had considered Kennedy an ally, was handed a copy of the Warren Report by the U.S. Ambassador William Mahoney, he opened it up, pointed to the name Allen Dulles, and handed it back to him. Whitewash was his total summary of a report. Yeah, that's why they don't like the African leaders. Okay. That's probably a good place to stop. We got a little bit more of that chapter, but we won't get through it before 5 o'clock. And I don't want to keep you guys past our normal time. So we'll end it there. And we will definitely be done with the book by next week, probably halfway through the week, would be my guess. Okay. What you got? Illini?
Wow, Colonel, yet another chapter of this book. He certainly makes the case. And he still doesn't have that crucial piece of information that James Angleton has Lee Harvey Oswald's file on his desk the day before, a couple of days before the shooting.
Right.
The fact that he knew that, Lee Harvey Oswald would be involved with something that's pretty close to a smoking gun. Now, the rest of all of this, Talbot's case, Talbot is really just kind of making a circumstantial case here. I think overall it fits. But as he's arguing that like Dulles had put this whole thing together, he makes a couple of conclusory statements in there that he hasn't built up every single fact categorically to make it. I think he's got a good circumstantial case that why was Dulles hanging out in McLean, Virginia at that CIA camp that day?
Right.
What was he doing there? Why was he having all these other conversations? Why was Jack Ruby talking to everybody in the mafia? And I think, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, their smoking gun back in 1978, I think, was the audio recordings of the Zapruder film that showed that there were too many gunshots, and that in particular the recoil on them, they basically did the audio diagnostics on it and found that some of those bullets came from different locations.
Correct.
Different distance from, the audio recording.
Right.
And they were able to use that to say that there must have been, that it wasn't a lone gunman. It was some kind of conspiracy because there was more than just one shooting location. I think you have all of that, and then I think you've got Warren getting involved in the Dulles getting involved in the cover-up. You kind of got the agency for conspiracy to commit murder, but who actually organized it and who was the kingpin? That one might be lost to the pages of history.
Correct. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. And when you look at the people that were present documented in Dallas, the circumstantial evidence to me strongly points to it being part of a similar, as Charles de Gaulle said. He called it. That guy knew more about Gladio than any leader at the time because he had been victim of it repeatedly. And he found out that one of the OAS officers was in Dallas because he sent an immediate request to Mexico because he had a scheduled meeting in Mexico and he thought that guy was going on to his next president to assassinate. So there was a big scramble in France once it became known in Paris that there was an OAS agent on the ground that had been shuttled down to the Mexican border. And they wanted to know what his disposition was because Charles de Gaulle actually considered canceling his trip because he thought he was next on the list. So crazy. It's crazy how you look at all of this stuff differently once you know what we know. Freedom, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel. Thanks for having me up. I just wanted to throw something out there. I thought of when you were mentioning, I forget the name of it, that phony committee that was put together just at the end of the chapter.
Fair play.
It kind of reminded me of the January 6th Select Committee a little bit.
Wait, the Fair Play for Cuba committee that Lee that the shooter was on, or the Warren Commission? The Warren Commission was the Senate committee to investigate the shooting.
Yeah, with all of the inside bad actors.
Yeah, so Warren Commission. Yeah.
Yeah.
A funny tidbit of the Warren Commission was Arlen Specter was a young, I think, Senate aide who helped. I mean, who was one of the Senate staffers who kind of helped take all of the depositions out. Like, he helped organize a lot of that commission, and later he winds up on the 9/11 commission.
Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how these certain senators and certain, Washington, D.C. characters keep showing up to manage the same deep political events committees to investigate them.
Yes, very weird. And for those of you who don't know, the guy that we were talking about, John McCloy, what's most interesting as it relates to this story, he didn't start out in the elite people in the Northeast. And he was actually in the military during World War I. He came back and got his law degree and worked at Caldwell, Wickersham, and Taft. And that Taft is part of Skull and Bones, Taft. And he went on to another law firm that represented wealthy clients in the Northeast. He also was a lawyer for corporations in Nazi Germany and advised I.G. Farben during the lead up to World War II, like Sullivan and Cromwell did. And during World War II, he was the Assistant Secretary of War. He also was part of the Land Lease, which was a kind of that could be a whole story. Just very interesting. And he also was on the government task force that built the Pentagon and created the OSS. So that's very interesting. He was also involved in the internment of Japanese Americans in the U.S. And he later becomes at one point, he was the civilian in charge of the U.S. sector in Germany. He also ends up as the president of the World Bank, which, as we all know, is part and parcel of the economic colonialization to continue after supposedly democracies are allowed to exist. But the World Bank was instrumental in distributing the Marshall Fund money, which was the initial primer for Operation Gladio. That McCloy. So he has a lot of dirt on him. He was what was referred to as the High Commissioner for Germany while they're setting up Operation Gladio, and letting all the Nazis get out of town. So very, very interesting. And then when all of that goes away, he ends up as Chase Manhattan chairman. He also served as the chairman of the Ford Foundation and was a trustee on the Rockefeller Foundation, both known to funnel money into the CIA projects. So, very, very interesting guy who represents all of the people that wanted JFK killed. He's on the commission. Whoa. Okay. Bridget, go ahead, Illini.
Colonel, do you want to talk about some of what's coming out about Edward J. Epstein? Because I know you made a post on it. I have a take on it too.
Go ahead.
I mean, so there's this guy who's kind of been known as a conspiracy theorist for decades and decades. He passed away in 2024, named Edward J. Epstein, and he wrote, the 3 books on the Kennedy assassinations that was published as part of the Assassination Chronicles. So he wrote Inquest, Counterplot, and Legend. And it's kind of funny. I'm trying to figure out the timeline for it right now, but it seems like he shows up shortly after Mark Lane. And he does his whole, series documenting, all the Warren Commission's mistaken assumptions and everything else. But if you take a look at in the index for the book, and you try to find, different countries in there, I think France is mentioned, Great Britain is mentioned. The one country that's never mentioned is Israel. Well, apparently, Edwin J. Epstein reaches out not to. He later reaches out to Jeffrey Epstein to grab hot dogs in New York City with Michael Wolff at 12:30, and he was very detailed. He thanked him for the hot dogs afterwards. But that was 2012, I think. But in 2003, he reaches out to Ghislaine Maxwell to invite her to serve on this shadow committee, this shadow 9/11 committee. And I think this is going on as Cynthia McKinney is setting up her own citizens committee, where she's got Indira Singh and she's got Michael Rupert and a couple of other speakers on September 11th. Well, he reaches out to Ghislaine Maxwell, saying that, hey, the people on this committee are going to be anonymous, but they're going to help me, review all the facts from September 11th and cover the stuff that the 9/11 committee ignored. But we're not going to tell anybody who's feeding stuff into all of this. And the person that he chooses is the daughter of a Mossad operative.
What?
So on the one hand, I think there's people who are saying that there's like a shadow government, there's a shadow committee, and that's their interpretation of that. And that one I don't buy, because the website was public. The link that he sent to everybody was he said, the committee's going to be like this. It's going to be in this vein, I think was the quote. And he gives everybody a link to a public site, which was, taken by Internet Archive at the time. So people can review that. But I think the whole thing is that there was kind of no mention of of Israel that time either. And like, I'm not out to get them, and I'm not out to not get them, but it is like that kind of behavior strikes me as a little bit weird.
It's totally weird. So while the citizens committee is being set up, he's setting up a shadow committee, which he sounds like a gatekeeper. Is that your assessment?
My assessment is that the CIA is always going to be sending people around,
yes,
to come up with a whole bunch of stuff,
yes,
and to speak a whole bunch of nonsense,
yes,
and to run around saying that they got abducted by aliens,
yes,
and they saw Elvis Presley's ghost, and Elvis Presley is the real person running the CIA, and all kinds of other nonsense. That is a strategy.
Yes, it is.
I think what I'm concerned about with Edward J. Epstein is that he does seem to point out a lot of facts, and he comes well recommended by the New York Times.
Well, there's your first clue.
Yeah, if you want to become a buff on all the conspiracies about, JFK, read, Edward J. Epstein's books. I think the concern is that there's probably a decent amount of truth in his books, but there's probably also a decent number of distractions.
Well, that's called limited hangout. That's actually a tactic.
It seems like there's a potential that there's some kind of a limited hangout going on.
Yeah.
And then with 9/11, he's reaching out to Ghislaine to find somebody that at the time, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe he didn't know about the Epstein network and what was going on there. At the time, maybe Ghislaine was a sympathetic figure. I mean, she was, the daughter of somebody who was taken out in an intelligence operation, likely.
But she was the daughter of a well-known intelligence operator.
Yes, she was also the daughter of somebody from Mossad, and that probably should have been disclosed.
That's crazy. Yeah, I hadn't seen that one. That's crazy. I mean, I know who Edward J. Epstein is, and he always looked to me like a gatekeeper, a limited hangout artist for intelligence agencies.
His books always seem to miss like really important things.
Yes,
like the misdirection that the CIA was doing on the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Yeah.
The fellow who was the CIA's liaison to that committee was hiding a whole bunch of stuff.
Yes,
and I believe that the staffers on the HSCA complained about it at the time.
Yes,
that never appeared in his books.
Yeah.
James I mean, there's certain details around James Angleton that were available, prior to, a lot of stuff. A lot of that doesn't make it into the books.
So he is definitely a limited hangout artist.
It seems like that's a reasonable question. Maybe it's just a whole series of coincidences.
No, that's a reasonable conclusion, not a question.
I'm a little bit more conservative than you.
I know.
Colonel. I'm willing to point out that there's a question here, and this works best when the person is still alive and they have to start answering some of these questions.
But that never happens. It just happens that all this shit comes out right after the person dies.
Yeah, well, we kind of know to be careful with Edward J. Epstein. Maybe some of his information is reliable, but now the fact that Edward J. Epstein missed it shouldn't factor into anybody's analysis of what's sort of a reasonable investigation.
But in bringing him up, one of the lessons that I hope everybody in this audience takes away is there's Edward J. Epstein's in the social media space right now. They will tell you things that are true, but they specifically leave out things that are also true, well known, but they will never tell you that. And they're limited hangout artists. They are hired and paid to do that.
I still think that now these days, in the age of LLMs, what you can do today that you can't do, and which I think is going to make the limited hangout strategy less effective, is you can put the different puzzle pieces together from different authors. 30 years ago, if you were buying these books and stuff like that on the Kennedy assassinations, and if you were trying to put all the different puzzle pieces together, you'd have to go off and read a book by Jack Anderson, and then you'd have to go off and read a book by Edward J. Epstein, and he'd leave important information out, and you'd have to read different books by different authors.
Yes.
And there weren't a lot out there who, Peter Dale Scott was probably Dale Scott is probably the one guy who's not limited to hangout.
He's so awesome.
Him and Lyndon LaRouche, but everybody, back in the 80s, Lyndon LaRouche made the mistake of going on Crossfire, and they painted him as an insane conspiracy theorist. And to be fair, LaRouche didn't do himself every single favor he could, in some of his media appearances. And that may have helped protect him in some ways. But,
not from going to jail.
You had to put the different, puzzle pieces together. And today, limited hangout is a less effective strategy because you can use these different admissions against interest from different parts of the system to say, hey, guys, there's a problem with the normie narrative.
But, Illini, we are in the age of 30-second TikTok videos. And that's to their advantage. You and I are not normal. We read all versions of the subject that we're researching. We do the due diligence to gather up the entire parts of the puzzle before we start putting the puzzle together. Many, and I would say most Americans are not like that. They are not going to do any further research. They are going to be spoon-fed a narrative. And that makes things dangerous when you have limited hangout people. Can you point out, and you guys know I'm very confrontational when it comes to that, when people leave pieces out. Today I made a comment to the guy who goes by Shu. I love his work. He's an amazing person. But when you start out a video saying that color revolutions are designed to overthrow authoritarian leaders, that's not at all true. Color revolutions were never designed to take out authoritarian leaders. They were 100%, because that's just, as you guys know, another word for a coup. They install authoritarian dictators. You can't give me an example. You cannot give me an example where an authoritarian person was not installed after a coup. You can't. And so the whole premise of the rest of his video is flawed because you don't understand what a color revolution is. And they bank on you not understanding that, because that's why the people are saying what's going on in the United States is a color revolution under the auspices that Trump's authoritarian. And that's kind of fundamental flaw. It's not a color revolution. It is intelligence agencies and the foundations that fund their operations trying to get rid of Trump. And I still, in today's day and age, have no clue how people don't get that very basic concept. Just check the math. Find me one where a government was overthrown and the country thrived under a living, breathing democracy in the aftermath. You can't. So, blah. Anyway. Shut that right down.
All right, Colonel. Yeah. Look, I mean, you can point to some. I mean, you have to go back hundreds of years, right? I mean, you have to go back to like Poland, or to the United States, or to
okay. All right. So, I'm talking post World War II.
I think it's hard to find.
Yeah, when intelligence operations became a formal part of the government.
Okay, well, I mean, what about the Solidarity movement in Poland in the late 80s? I think that, I mean, look, you definitely had, the communist secret police running Poland. In East Germany, you had the Stasi, and they were horrible. Things seemed to get more democratic after, the Berlin Wall fell.
The Solidarity movement was not an intelligence coup.
It was a union movement.
Yes.
That probably did receive some help from the Reagan administration. I have a feeling that, NED and IRI were probably helping that along with, Pope John Paul II.
He tried, and then he got shot.
Sure, but the point is that, Poland was kind of the reason that the irony of ironies, the Berlin Wall fell, and it was, a trade union movement.
Yes.
And they were able to. I'm not sure if they used strategy of tension to bring down Eastern Europe, but they basically made the situation unworkable for the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And basically, forced Gorbachev to say, okay, we'll let you out.
But Gorbachev was in on you. There's so much that is not known to the public about Gorbachev and Reagan's kind of controlled demolition of the Soviet Union that gave birth to Bill Browder and Edmund Safra.
Is this the perestroika deception?
I
just learned about this one.
Yeah. So there was an agreement that was made that he was basically, I don't know if you've read any about the when he did his visit to the United States and all of that. It's fascinating. Because I know we were not told what was really happening, like with everything else. There is, and I honestly, I think that's exactly what happened when the Shah fell. The fact that the Ayatollah was in France and the complicity of the intelligence structure, and I know all about the hostage thing, and I have my opinion about that as well. I just literally don't trust any story that we've ever been told about way things. They used all of what was going on over there, the whole oil, raising of the prices and everything. All of that was done after Jimmy Carter. And again, I don't like Jimmy Carter, so don't give me any grief on this. All of that was done after Jimmy Carter fired the entire covert section of the CIA. There was event after event after event to make sure that his presidency was destroyed. He is also the only guy that, besides JFK, that tied foreign aid to not being a dictator and not killing your own people. So, and again, he wasn't a good guy. Not saying he was. There's just so much to all of this that now when you go back and you start looking at things, I have way more questions than I do answers.
Yeah, it's amazing how history is kind of getting rewritten. And if I recall correctly, I mean, that's kind of what happened, during the Civil War and during World War II.
Yes.
Certain aspects of how everybody understood history changed. And I think this whole Epstein thing is forcing everybody to confront all this prior work by these little known authors and conspiracy theorists like Mark Lane.
Yes.
And I guess and Peter Dale Scott and Lyndon LaRouche. And I might throw Seymour Hersh in that category. I understand the complaints that he's limited hangout. I still haven't made a determination on him.
Yeah.
And the truth is that there's so much that we don't know about what's going on behind the scenes that's driving everything. I think the one cool thing that everybody kind of knows and can agree on today is that the Rockefellers were really kind of running everything, at least from the 40s to the 70s.
That's what Warhamster says, all roads lead to the Rockefellers. I don't think that's, I think that's true in America, but I don't think that's true overall. Because they were just kind of the US counterweight to people in Britain and Europe in general. But yes, the Rockefellers is behind.
I mean, perhaps once you lose the Rockefellers, all the puppet strings then suddenly lead not to, upstate New York, but to certain banks, I think, what is it, in France, Switzerland, and the UK, with a similar R name at the front of
the Rothschilds. I'll go ahead and say it.
All right. I'm afraid for me, it's they who shall not be named.
But it doesn't stop there either, because if you go back and you look at the Wallenbergs in Sweden, they're huge and no one ever talks about them because their motto is to be without being seen. They're
the Warburgs.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of families out there.
Yes.
And okay, I just hope that we get more disclosure on that. We get more evidence. And I mean, I think it's somewhat clear from the Epstein files that there is a very clear Rothschild business relationship.
Yes.
How deep that relationship goes and how much control is really being exercised, I don't know. What's clearer is the Rockefeller relationship.
Yes.
I'm not. Have you watched the video of that Epstein did with Bannon?
No.
There's a fascinating 2-hour video that takes place over 2 days because he changes shirts in it. But he, at the very beginning of the video, he talks about like how he got involved with all this different stuff, and he winds up, being on the board of Rockefeller University. How he did it? Well, he was friends with David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller, he said, was one of the kindest people he knew. Put him on the board of Rockefeller. Nancy Kissinger's there, and then you sort of see these connections that all of a sudden you're like, wow, this guy's at the epicenter of power.
Yes.
You got the Rockefeller, you got one of the Rockefellers, and you've got Henry Kissinger, who was Rockefeller's man inside the Nixon administration.
Yes.
That's literally Seymour Hersh's quote.
Yep.
On it. And David A. Rockefeller is the one who puts him on the board of Rockefeller University, and David A. Rockefeller is the one who puts him on the Council on Foreign Relations. And this happens in the late 1980s, before David Rockefeller at least supposedly gives that tape-recorded speech from the early 1990s that like I remember this from when I was in college in the aughts, and I just remember, wow, it's a bunch of conspiracy theorists and who knows what's behind that tape. But maybe recent events lend more credence to that tape, and maybe.
Oh, you faded out.
The first 20 minutes of that tape, in terms of how, in terms of how Epstein, gets onto the CFR, that's just fascinating. And it tells you that there's a Gladio link here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to go find that tape. Send me the link for it if you still have it. All of this is crazy. So I want to give a shout out to Benjamin Hunt over on Rumble. He says, your hair looks fabulous. I'm a retired hairstylist, so I noticed great hair. I'm going through your channel and devouring your Gladio tapes. Thank you for your dedication to getting this information out to us. You're welcome, Benjamin, and thank you for that compliment. I have literally the best hairdresser in our entire town here. And my hair is thanks to her. God bless all the hairstylists out there that makes us look beautiful every day. So anyway, and happy hunting. There's so much material out there. And for all of you that came in late, I will be posting the podcast that I did with the guy living in Russia right now. To my surprise, he's actually an American citizen as well. He was born in Russia. His family came over here when he was a kid, and he grew up in North Carolina, joined the U.S. military, enlisted, and became an officer, just like me, and got out just before he pinned on major because of all of the crap that was going on in the military at the time, and was employed in the oil industry. And he is working over in Russia right now as a result of his expertise in the oil industry. So it was an amazing conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. So there's that. Now, I want to let you guys know something. I rarely do this, but I talked to Bridget off camera, and we're going to be doing a couple of different initiatives. I'm working with someone that is going to basically take on the task of building us a brain map. You guys have heard me talk about that. One of my early videos, I was using that Kumu brain map, and was just fascinated that having something like that with all of the information that you could just kind of click through, because we are in the 30-second environment, is critical, I think, for posterity, to have all of this information that we've gathered up in a meaningful tool that people can go and use. And we're also going to produce an intro video like everybody else has. You guys know I'm not into all of the glitz and glamour. My whole job here is education. My whole job is taking the research that we've done and present it to everyone out there so that they can learn real history along with us. So we do make a little bit of money from X, and all of the subscribers that I have on Substack and on X is greatly, greatly appreciated. But it is going to cost us about $2,000 to produce that video that we will have and we can run on our podcast. So if you guys have the ability to help us with that, I would greatly appreciate it. I rarely ever ask. I have all of the money that we've collected, which is, a few $100s in profit from our store. For those of you who are new, we do have a Shopify store that's called the Colonel's Corner. and you can buy t-shirts and challenge coins and mugs and stuff like that. Well, that's it. T-shirts, and coffee mugs and challenge coins. We are going to use that money to do this, but we still could use a little extra as far as making up the difference. So it's going to be the video is going to be professionally done by a video company. I've already started talks. Bridget and I are putting all of the screenshots together for them that we would like to use for it. So I just wanted to put that out there if you guys want to do that. On X, there's actually a donate button where the money comes directly to us. We don't want to do a give, send, go, or any of those other things because they take out part of the money when they send it to you. So they charge the whole fee thing and stuff like that. So on Rumble, if you do however you do that, I have a Rumble wallet now, so you can donate over there as well. But it will be, and I don't want any more money, and I will keep you guys updated when we have enough money to actually do that. But the guy that's doing the brain map is in Australia. I've already had one planning session with him. I'm going to get War Hamster involved with him as well because I know War Hamster wants to do something very similar to that. So I would like to combine all of War Hamster's research with mine so we can have all of the skull and bones that we've done, scroll and key, and all of that other stuff. And this guy is perfect for doing it. And I just shared his name's Stab or something like that. I shared his, had a real short video this morning that I shared with everybody. An amazing, brilliant guy, but we're going to have to pay him to do it because it's going to take him the better part of, I mean, this is all he does, and he has a lot of it. He has a lot of the Pilgrim Society already done. So this is just folding in the Gladio portion of it, and he's already started working on it. So any help that you can provide us so that we can give you guys a tool that you can use talking to your friends, and you can just like click right through it going, here's Gladio, here's the people that were involved, and all of that other stuff. So anyway, and Illini, I want to talk with you probably tomorrow offline because I think he could probably use the book index thing too. So anyway, love you guys. Have a nice weekend. And we're going to do, I think I mentioned tomorrow morning, another Tommy podcast, which I will put out as soon as he gets it edited and posted with EM and General Holt. And I don't know why I always forget the Army Lieutenant Colonel guy's name. I think his name's Steve. But anyway, hope you guys enjoy it. I love doing those shows with them. That's it. You guys have a nice weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday, and we'll finish the book next week. Take care, everybody. See you later, and welcome to the show, Ben.